Welcome to the File Forms Business Compliance Podcast, where we help business owners and their professional advisors stay on track and aware of all their compliance needs while running a business in the United States. I'm your host, Frank Tuminello, CEO and co-founder of File Forms, an industry-leading government-approved software compliance platform used by thousands of businesses and their professional service providers nationwide. Thank you for joining, and let's get started with this week's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another interesting week in the realm of business compliance. I'm your host, Frank Tuminello, hosting today the File Forms Business Compliance Podcast, where we're really excited to have another guest on, Bill Quick from Polsinelli. Polsinelli is a national law firm. Bill's based in Kansas City, Missouri. Bill operates as a fractional general counsel and also chairs the Corporate Transparency Act initiative within the firm. And we're super excited to have Bill on because Bill works with a variety of different clients, inclusive of family offices and different investors, investment funds, et cetera, and really just helping them stay at the forefront of regulatory changes. So, Bill, it's so nice to have you. Please do introduce yourself and say hello to our listeners this week.
Hello, and thank you, Frank, for having me on your podcast. This should be a lot of fun. You and I have spoken quite a bit over the last year. And definitely are in the thicket of Corporate Transparency Act compliance issues and the oftentimes less than pristine interpretation of how you deal with that on a practical level. So, I'm definitely someone who is about practical application and trying to be as efficient in helping my clients meet their legal requirements. So that's been a goal of mine, and I'm still trying to perfect that.
Definitely. It's super important. And, I think clients really do value the folks like us who aren't afraid of reading the law directly or interpreting different folks' opinions, whether it's a court case or a ruling or a notice from the regulator. So, at the end of the day, I think the theme is transparency, and it's not just kind of getting the right information to the right place, but also just understanding how these laws will ultimately be rolled out. So, it's great to be talking with you, and you're always hot on topics as they come out of FinCEN, and the LinkedIn posts have been a lot of fun to read and review over the course of time, and have really valued your insights on the information that we put out there. It feels like it's been like a full saga of Corporate Transparency Act from when it was passed to it ultimately being rolled out. Help me understand just like when you first heard of this law, kind of, what was the first thing that came to mind? And, when did you start educating clients on this new law that's just very, very underspoken about?
Yeah, it's definitely been a very crazy and interesting journey so far. So I'll give you kind of the backstory on how I first found out about Corporate Transparency Act. So I was helping a client who was wanting to set up a business entity, and they wanted to make sure that they minimize their public information in the public domain. So we had set up their entity in a particular state that had limited disclosure obligations for owners of the business. And this was probably, I would say, about January 20th of 2021. And I distinctly remember this phone call because I was getting ready to hang up the phone, and I said, hold on a second. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out to you that there's this thing called the Corporate Transparency Act, and it's been kicked around Congress for the last 2 decades, and I don't think it will ever get passed. But if it does, it would impact what we're doing here today. And if it were passed, your personal information would be available through that filing. My client's like, great, appreciate you giving me the heads up. And not more than maybe an hour and a half after that, I was going through my emails and an email popped up said, sign up for a CLE on the new Corporate Transparency Act. And I remember I was just, what the, that actually happened? And I couldn't believe it. And I started digging into it. And the more I dug into it, the deeper I got into it, I'm like, holy cow, this is going to be huge. This is going to impact almost every single business entity in the US. I'm like, this is crazy. I can't believe I hadn't heard about this before because I'm a corporate attorney and I would think that I would know about it. And, from then on, I would canvass people like, hey, have you heard of the Corporate Transparency Act? Everyone was just like, no, I've never heard of that. And then they're like, I don't think that's a real thing, Bill. I don't believe you. I got
Us
that
too.
a lot. I got
Us
that a
too.
lot for like 3 years. I got that clear up until December 31st of last year. People were
Yeah.
like, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I'm like, I think it really is. And I put out a piece in the American Bar Association Business Law Today journal last July. And I said, here's the Corporate Transparency Act. Here are 7 reasons why I think you need to take this seriously. And it was I think it was the most read article in July of last year for the ABA, and got a lot of response from the limited people that read it. But still, I think even till today, most people have not heard of the Corporate Transparency Act or have any idea about what it is. And the limited people who have heard about it think that it's been overturned and is unconstitutional,
Yep.
which is not completely accurate. There's an element of truth to that, but it's not completely accurate. So I know FinCEN has, in their own words, conducted a robust public relations campaign to try and educate people about that. I don't know that it's been particularly successful so far, but I do think as we approach the January 1st, 2025 deadline for entities that existed before January 1st, 2024, which is the vast majority of businesses in the U.S., I think it will start to sink in and people will have to deal with it. But that's probably one of the topics we're going to talk about is, what are the timing issues and what is the current, responsiveness of the business community to its filing obligations.
Definitely. I love your LinkedIn post amplifying the message.
It was like,
Listen, they only have so many followers on LinkedIn and YouTube and all these other channels. I mean, FinCEN's just not a popular government agency, unlike the IRS, who just about everyone knows about because they have to report to them every year. This is the first time anyone's had to report to FinCEN, so why would they be following FinCEN's releases? It's just challenging. It's an uphill battle completely. Have you ever seen laws this broad-reaching pass over the course of your experience or time dating back to law school? I mean, in studies, I mean, this seems like a very, very broad-reaching, almost like a, once in a century type of law that's passing here. Help us understand that perspective.
I think for the business community, you're spot on. I mean, I have not seen something like this in the 25 plus years I've been practicing. Maybe when limited liability companies kind of started to take hold and people started using those entities, maybe would be something comparable, or the 86 Tax Act when it got passed might be somewhat comparable. The only kind of business statute that comes to mind is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act when it came out in 2002, but it really only directly applied to publicly traded companies, which ironically is the opposite of here.
Yep.
If you're a publicly traded company, you're exempt from the filing requirements of the Corporate Transparency Act. But I would say maybe that would be the only comparable example I've seen. And the interesting part about, well, for me, because I'm a business entity wonk and, find it interesting because that's what I do for a living. It's interesting that, lost my train of thought there. I got too excited.
We love business entities too.
Yeah. This is the first, it's not the only, well, I'm trying to think of how to describe this because I think some people have mischaracterized what I've said before, so I'll try to be very careful. Typically, business entity law is at the state level, and formation of business entities is governed by state law. There
Yep.
are instances where you can form entities at the federal level, like the Boy Scouts of America and some other, nonprofit entities. There are some for-profit entities that have national charters. So it's not accurate to say that the federal government has no role in business entity formation or has never had it. It does, but it's very limited. The vast majority of business entities have been and are formed at the state, tribal, other government similar
Local jurisdiction.
local jurisdiction
Yep.
type of place. So this is the first time that the federal government has kind of shown an interest and gotten involved with that. It hasn't gotten involved with the actual formation process. That's still the same, still covered
Yep.
by the local jurisdictions. It only has covered the disclosure of owners and control persons, which is the purview of the Corporate Transparency Act.
And it seems, and obviously like spending a lot of time in this realm of compliance, you go on to states' websites, Secretary of State's websites, for example, and doing a formation process. It seems like a lot of this data, probably already exists in some capacity at the state level, maybe not the actual IDs themselves. But you kind of wonder why business owners are now being asked to voluntarily serve up data when potentially, the state could just provide it to the federal government. But, I think the government probably, hopefully gave that a thought and then realized that there was a valid reason not to go that direction. But, I think as you talk to folks who aren't as knowledgeable on the CTA and you kind of educate them on the topic, I find that to be a pretty consistent reaction. Like, doesn't the government already have this data on me? Like, why doesn't the IRS provide this on my behalf? Or why doesn't, the Secretary of State provide this on my behalf? But it's uncertain, why the government operates in the ways they do. And, at the end of the day, as practitioners and people looking to serve small businesses, the most we can do is educate them on the lay of the land and then ultimately provide solutions and guidance how to accomplish these things successfully. But, if you think about just corporate tax returns compared to, the number of corporate tax returns that are filed each year compared to, the 30 or 40 million, BOI reports that are going to be filed, it's multiples of the number of corporate tax returns that are filed each year, which I think is always just a helpful way of kind of benchmarking how broad-reaching this new law is. Any thoughts on just like people needing to file this BOI report and, why they perhaps chose not to file it during tax season and kind of, kick the can down the road a bit, despite the fact that many entities will need to comply by the end of the year?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple factors, early on. One, the Act went into effect January 1st of this year, 2024, so no one was complying before then. I think when it first went into effect, there was a lot of kind of, wait and see. I don't want to be the first one to deal with this. I want them to get the kinks out of the system. I want to see how some other people are dealing with it. So I think there's a bit of a natural delay in that regard. And then on March 1st of this year, court ruling came out in the Northeast District of the Northeast District of the Northern District of Alabama. Anyway, in
Yep.
Alabama, the federal district court ruling. In that federal district court ruling said, hey, Congress doesn't have the authority to do what Congress does. FinCEN doesn't, and Treasury don't have the authority to do what they do. So I'm going to say that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional, and I'm going to award, injunction for the plaintiffs in this case. So it only applied to the plaintiffs in that case.
Right.
And the plaintiffs in that case, it was a trade group So the members of that trade group got the benefit of it, but only the members of the trade group on the date that the ruling came out. So,
Yep.
which was March 1st. So if you had let your membership lapse in that trade group, you were out of luck. And if you thought you were going to go and join up with the trade group to get out of the corporate transparency, you were out of luck. And also, only the entities that were members of the trade group got the benefit of the ruling, not their affiliated entities or their business owners or beneficial owners. So really, the scope of people that are able to enjoy that ruling is very limited.
Yep.
And even the ones who are enjoying it aren't necessarily going to be enjoying it for all of their entities. So. And I don't know if you want to jump to that topic, but that was one of the things I think that caused people to pull back and be like, well, wait a minute, let's see how this is going to,
Yeah,
pan out
certainly.
over the year. And I
Certainly, the
don't,
people who are actually aware of the Corporate Transparency Act, generally speaking, I think they were attentive enough to kind of learn about the Corporate Transparency Act, which isn't very many people, and
Right.
then to also have the ability to keep an eye on this court case now, which is still ongoing. It kind of just adds another layer of uncertainty and something that's already pretty complex. I guess as you think about it, I mean, what percentage of your clients do you think are going to have to comply with this? Can you kind of describe, the typical clients that you work with and how they'll be
so
impacted?
certainly, so I represent a lot of private clients. I represent a lot of portfolio companies, a lot of family offices, a lot of real estate developers. We tend to form a lot of business entities for their practice, a lot of financial institutions that set up special purpose entities, etc. So I would say virtually all of my clients are impacted by this. There are some that qualify for an exemption, but it's far fewer than think they qualify for an exemption. And I don't have a huge public company practice anymore, so they are exempt. But even those public companies tend to have subsidiaries, affiliates that get drug into this. So even if the public company itself is not required to comply, there are other touch points where they have to comply. And most of the people I deal with aren't, they don't just have one business entity. They're associated with a number of business entities. And it tends to creep into their lives in a lot of places they wouldn't expect. So I'll just give you an example, my personal example. I live in Kansas City. My house is in a homes association that surrounds a pond. And the homes all have easements to the pond, and then the pond is owned by a nonprofit entity. Well, that nonprofit entity has to file with the Corporate Transparency Act. And let me tell you how many times I have tried to explain to the person who, unfortunately, had agreed to be president of the association before this year, that he now has to file with FinCEN for our group because we don't have a 501c designation and we're
Yep.
not exempt. So, it doesn't really do much activity. It's something that you normally with around, we don't have to do anything for that. Well, yeah, you do. And I've, have some partners where they're like, well, I've got a LLC where we own some hunting land and, there's X number of members and we have a board and this and that. And we don't have to report, do we? I'm like, well, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you
You
do.
have to report that. People set up LLCs for, estate planning purposes. Those
Definitely.
have to be, I mean, it's just,
The prevalence of LLCs in the real estate world
Yep.
has absolutely blown my mind away since
the
entering this
prevalence is
business.
huge.
Yeah, it's very prevalent. You mentioned the exemptions, and something I always wondered, and honestly, people stump me when they ask me, why 5 million of revenue for the large company exemption and 20 full-time employees? Why is there like a precedent law or a reason why the government feels like that is the correct threshold? Because I mean, it just seems like kind of random to me, but I'd love your thoughts if any.
I would say it's arbitrary. I have not seen anything that indicates where those numbers came from.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, like,
Other than someone said, well, that feels good. I think
right,
let's go it, and it's more than 20. It's not 20 or more. It's more than 20.
more
So
than
it's
20.
actually 21 or more.
Yep.
Some people get caught up and they think, oh, I hit 20, so I'm good. Well, that's not the case.
Yep.
And then the 5 million of revenue, and then the fact you have to have reported on a prior year's tax filing. So it could be that, you might not be exempt now, but if you get your taxes filed for last year, you suddenly become exempt, or the inverse could happen. And then it's like, well, if you file some extensions, do you get to stay exempt longer until you actually do file your tax filing? What happens if you keep dragging out your tax filing? Can you still, continue to enjoy your exemption under old financial data? You know, TBD to
Interesting.
be determined. Yeah.
TBD. So obviously, there's like plenty of complexities here. Not every homeowners association has the benefit of having you as a member. Broadly speaking, family offices they have resources internally, but they don't have large benches of resources to do administrative work by any means. Most of them run
And they
fairly
usually
lean.
don't have 21 or more employees.
That's true.
They may have hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, but they don't have 21 employees. And
Yeah,
so,
I used to work for a middle market private equity firm. It was a 10 man deal team, and God bless our administrative staff with all the work they had to do with keeping up with different compliance docs. So I'm sure you can appreciate that for some that do have boatloads of entities. I mean, they're going to have quite a big amount of reports to file. How are you guiding those clients? Are you telling them to engage Polsinelli, or are you telling them to work with a third party, or are you telling them to do it themselves or talk to their CPA? Is there kind of a common theme that you kind of guide folks towards?
yeah, so, I will say our firm generally is not filing documents for people for the Corporate Transfers Act. It's just not cost effective for people. We are advising people on, who needs to be reported and helping them work through some complexities of who are beneficial owners and who aren't, and who in their portfolio structure has to be, make a report and who doesn't, things of that nature. But we have generally been, recommending our clients to get involved with a third-party vendor like FileForms, who can assist them in the actual filing process. If people have a small number of entities, just one or two, sometimes they just go ahead and get on FinCEN's site to take care of the filing themselves. I've noticed a lot of people tend to file inaccurately when they do that.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
It's concerning.
yeah. So, a lot of times I'll see some, oh, yeah, we got our thing filed. And then it's like, we're filing as the, guardian of a minor. I'm like, I don't think a minor owns this. And I'm like, no. I'm like, well, what did you check that? Well, I thought we had to check that. I'm like, well, no, yeah, now you have to go back and amend your filing.
Right.
And dealing with the company applicant is somewhat complicated for people because they have to disclose to third parties that aren't intimately involved with their entity, and figuring out who that is and getting the information that's necessary can be a little bit complicated. Dealing with people's personal identifying information, their name, their birth date, their residence address, and their image of their permissible government ID can get a little bit tedious. I will say, I refer to it as the FinCEN cheat code. I recommend that everybody goes out and get a FinCEN identifier number and uses that number because it has a lot of benefits both for the individual and for the companies. But yeah, there's a lot out there to deal with.
Yeah, I honestly was a little surprised that, more private equity firms and real estate funds didn't take like a little bit more of a proactive approach. I appreciate the nature of there being, this Alabama District Court ruling that is on the horizon and maybe cause some people to press pause. But generally speaking, I thought there was going to be more private equity firms that were kind of at least getting like spreadsheets cleaned up and making sure everything's in order. Where, still to this day, I'm having kind of intro calls with folks, and it's like, oh wow, we got to pull from here, we got to pull from there, we got to reach out to our attorney. It just seems that with call it 6 to 7 months to go until the deadline. There's summer, the holidays in there. It's just going to be somewhat of a fire drill unless folks start kind of chipping away at it now. Because to your point, there are certainly some pain points, some headaches, some points of confusion, and at the end of the day, folks are going to get busy. So there's so many resources that can actually provide guidance, and I think if everyone waits till the fourth quarter, who knows? Is your calendar going to be booked? From 9 a.m.
It's
to
going to be
5?
painful. It's going to be painful if you wait till the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Because
I
there's
just
gonna be
think
so many
IDs
other people trying
expiring.
to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Going to the DMV, that's not a real time process whatsoever. That's sometimes can take a few tries. So there are sticking points, and once again, just the unawareness of these issues. People haven't even dipped their toe in the knowledge base that's required, no less kind of the worldly perspective of how things practically get done. So that's why I think it's just helpful to kind of cover these topics out in the open for folks. As the law rolled out, what do you think was like the most surprising component? I mean, was it the information or lack thereof that was coming out? Was it the tools, the support that was provided by FinCEN? I mean, what was either overwhelming or underwhelming as kind of that Jan 1 effective date came to fruition, and then the subsequent months leading up to now?
I think probably I'll maybe say this, the most frustrating part about the Corporate Transparency Act is it was just kind of a black box, and there was not a lot of information coming out as to where FinCEN stood on the rollout of their beneficial ownership secure system, the BOSS system, BOSS. And as a result, even up until December 31st, people were skeptical as to whether it was actually going to go live on January 1st or not, because there was no knowledge to inform people that it was ready to go. And I remember on New Year's Eve, I popped the champagne, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get on the FinCEN website and
Me
get
too.
my number. And I got on there, and it wasn't active. And it was maybe like 12:50. Like, well, I'm not going to stay up for
Right.
this because it could go live at 12:30. Or it could go live on April 7th at 12:30. I'm not going to spend all night waiting up. So I went to bed and then got up the next morning. And my girlfriend was like, oh, the website's live. I'm like, what? Okay. So
I set my
she
alarm.
registered.
I set
Yeah.
my alarm,
So it
and
was maybe like 9 a.m. Central or
9
10
a.m.
a.m.
It was
Central.
like
Yeah.
typical government, when the work week starts. But it was funny. I
And I was
actually,
surprised they were working on January 1st. I thought it would
yeah,
possibly go live on January 2nd, but it was live,
us
and it
too.
was fairly glitch free. I was surprised. I thought it would be more cumbersome and difficult to file, and it was fairly easy.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree 100%. I screenshotted my phone and sent it to my business partner Kenny, and I circled exactly the text on the window. I said, I guarantee this becomes a live link at some point tomorrow, because
yeah.
I just needed to know how we were going to gain access to it. But I think generally speaking, folks have been relatively happy with how things have rolled out so far. Connecting to the database directly through the API was a fun part of our kind of effective date and subsequent months. That was I never thought I'd be able to text directly with FinCEN, but they were absolutely phenomenal in kind of getting us connected. And now having the ability to file in bulk instantly, I think is going to really provide a lot of ease for the many family offices and folks out there who just have a ton of LLCs. So why don't we shift now to the Alabama Northern District Court ruling? We touched on it a little bit. Obviously, it was an interesting time when that ruling came out. Thankfully, FinCEN was pretty quick to kind of give notice of, I think they kept us in a holding pattern that weekend, but then that Monday, FinCEN came out with a notice, and then the subsequent Monday, they issued the appeal. Where do you think we go from here? Now that it's been appealed, we're starting to see some briefs come out. Can you just kind of help me understand, where you see kind of the months unfolding on the court case?
Certainly. So I'm going to start by saying I'm not a litigator,
Smart.
but I did talk to one of my litigators about this yesterday.
Awesome.
So his thought is that he isn't sure when the 11th Circuit is going to make their ruling. It will probably depend on whether they take oral arguments or not. I know that FinCEN has filed their brief and the NASB has filed their brief. And then there's been, I want to say 20 to 25 amicus briefs that have been filed also in the case by a lot of other, institutions, organizations that want to make sure that their policy considerations are weighed by the court. So I don't know if I don't believe the court has made a decision yet whether it's going to take oral arguments or it's just going to, make a decision on the pleadings. It could just make a decision on the pleadings. It has, de novo review of this case, so it is not at all bound by the lower court's decision. It can make its own decision based on the information presented. It could be that they uphold the lower court's ruling. I would say that's unlikely, but I also thought it was unlikely that the district court would rule the way they did. So, that's, I'm 0-1 on that so far. The court could just look at the briefings and make a ruling. If they overturn the lower court, it's just going to go back to the lower court. And then there's some other constitutional arguments that were made at the lower court that the court didn't rule on because it said, well, we don't need to because it's unconstitutional because it exceeds Congress's Commerce Clause, mandate. So likely that ruling, I think, will come before the end of the year. I think the 11th Circuit has indicated that they understand that there's a time element in this, and both parties that have agreed to accelerate the proceedings, and I would assume the 11th Circuit's going to abide by that. So, hopefully sometime early fall, mid-fall, early winter, we may get a ruling on this. But don't get your hopes up because I'm confident whoever loses that ruling is going to appeal either to the 11th Circuit en banc, which means that all of the 11th Circuit judges, sit and make a decision and or go straight to an appeal to the Supreme Court, which may or may not accept the case. 99% of the cases that are submitted to the Supreme Court do not get picked up by the Supreme Court. I don't know if this is one where they would want to do that or not. So I think the reality is we're not going to have a definitive answer before January 1, 2025, which is the deadline that everybody has to make their filings. So I would encourage everyone to go ahead and meet their filing obligations. If you formed an entity in 2024, you have 90 days from the date of formation to do your initial filing. I would definitely meet those deadlines. And I'm proceeding as though this is going to be a thing that continues on in perpetuity. And I'm not banking on this going away anytime soon.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to take in there, and it almost feels like it's harder to outrun this than to just get the filing done. I mean, there's plenty of tools out there to get the filings complete. And just keeping up with the law is going to be it's going to be a chapter of business history for sure, because of how prevalent this is impacting businesses. So,
and I will say, everyone's first reaction is, put up the defenses. I don't like this. I don't like giving my information to the government. This is BS. This is an overreach. And once they file their materials, like, no, that was a lot. easier and less of a thing than I thought it was going to be. So I think the reality of the filing processing, disclosing your information is less burdensome and onerous than people think it's going to be. So as with many things, the fear of the unknown is often scarier than the actual known.
Yep. And do you think states are just being somewhat dramatic in, maintaining sovereign authority over kind of, corporations? I mean, do they feel like they're losing power? Because I mean, in my opinion, it's pretty
I
evident.
don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, the 22 states that submitted an amicus brief, they're making points that, at the end of the day, they're going to have to own the money laundering issue if the federal government doesn't. So, I mean, do states really want that responsibility, or would it be easier to just kind of allow the government to execute on the BOI reporting and get the information they need to properly police the financial crime within our nation? I'm not sure. So,
It's a good question.
yeah, it is. We'll see how things unfold. Do you think the presidential election will have any impact on the Corporate Transparency Act? It's like just another piece in this whole
Yeah,
saga.
it might. I don't know. I would say it would be more of an. I would say Congress is more of a wild card than the presidential election because, and it hasn't gone to Biden. I would assume Biden would veto a change to this. If Trump were elected, I would assume that Trump would not veto a change to this. Uh, but whether something got to their desk or not is a different story. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles to get from where you're at
Definitely.
now to having something passed by Congress, both houses of Congress, and signed by the president going into law. And I just don't see any very clear paths to that. Um, and I note that President Trump was in office when this was enacted, and he vetoed it. He vetoed the National Defense Spending Act, of which this was a part. So, I don't know if he was vetoing the whole because of the whole National Defense Spending Act, or he didn't like this part of the National Defense Spending Act. I could see why he wouldn't like this part of the National Defense Spending Act, or if it was something else. But that was the only piece of legislation he vetoed when he was in office. So I would assume that he probably would not like this and would be in favor of not having this if he were elected. But as I said, there's a lot of other factors that play into that.
Definitely. I mean, there are bills in Congress right now that are effectively looking to repeal this act, or at least extend in other capacities. Do you think those will get traction in the next few months, or do you think
No,
it's really the Alabama District Court and kind of 11th
I
Circuit?
think that's just a flat no. It's not going to happen between now and the election. And the interesting thing is, I've seen these, bills and attempts to make changes to the Corporate Transparency Act, and usually what people project about them is far different than what the bill actually is. There was a bill that was introduced in December, and I was seeing emails about write to your congressman, get this bill to kill the Corporate Transparency Act
Yep.
passed. And then I looked at the bill, and it was like, hey guys, we're going to extend the 1 year to 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
All it was like, wait a minute, that's not what I saw in the everyone's commentary. Rush out to get your senator to extend the filing deadline by a year. That
Right.
it's
And honestly,
and
I
I
wouldn't.
think a lot of that was associated with the black box thing I mentioned earlier. It's like, well,
Sure.
how can we get this done? Is a year enough? I don't know. I think the way FinCEN has rolled this out, and they've got, I think over 2 million people that have filed now, that seems to indicate that the system is up and running and fine, and it probably doesn't need longer for people to file. So it kind of undermines that whole argument of we need more time to deal with this.
I think I even saw that the NSBA in their brief, they were suggesting that, if it was upheld, at least just kind of shrink it to those entities that are actually doing transactions versus those that are relatively inactive. So it almost feels like they're kind of falling on their sword a little bit and saying that, like, no, this actually will exist in some capacity, and certainly not get fully repealed, if at all.
Yeah, it did not instill confidence in me that they thought their position was going to be upheld.
Yep. So that kind of brings us to our next point. I mean, do you think this is a constitutional law? I mean, is this an overreach? Or I know you're not a Supreme Court justice yet, but
Well, I will say when this first came out, like everyone, I was like, oh, this is going to be a pain in the ass. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Probably not good. But, as I've gotten further into it, I'm kind of like, well, it's not as egregious as I thought it was going to be. It's a lot simpler process to file. The information they were asking for isn't a huge amount of information. Maybe it's a good thing to, help us fighting the, international fight against money laundering and terrorism and other things that FinCEN is working toward. Is this the ideal way to handle it? No.
right.
It seems like, and I think I've used this analogy. It's like we're casting a huge net to catch fish that we should be spearfishing.
Mm-hmm.
And 99% of the businesses in the U.S. are going to be unwitting and bycatch that has to deal with this and shouldn't have to pay for it because they're law abiding and they're not causing any problem. But there's really not a way to get the database that would be necessary to do the things that the government wants to do in combating money laundering and other illicit activity without having something like this. So,
well, I know other countries have done it, and it's continued to roll out across, the economies in the G7. So you got to think there is a bit of a domino effect that probably holds merits. It's interesting as well because, obviously the newly formed businesses, they've potentially even breached their deadline if they haven't filed already, if you were formed in January or February. Have you heard of any fines being levied so far on BOI reporting, or do you anticipate, when we might see the first, fine or notice sent to a business? Not that we want businesses to get fined by any means. We want to help them avoid that completely. But I'm just curious because we get that question a lot as well. They're like, oh, well, if only 2 million have filed so far, like, do you really think they're going to fine 28 million or 30 million businesses? Any sense there directionally?
yeah, I don't have any insight on that at all. If I were to speculate, I would guess that FinCEN is probably more focused on getting people to comply this year than on enforcing the act against people that have not complied. I think they've pretty much said as much. So I think their goal for this year is to work to get people to comply. I don't know if they're going to be rolling out an enforcement mechanism this year. And I don't know if they're going to roll it out on January 1st of next year. It may be later in the year. But here's the problem. If you don't comply timely, then it's just a ticking time bomb until someone comes knocking at your door and says, hey, 3 years ago, you were supposed to do this and you didn't. And now we're going to assess a fine and we're going to dig into this further and determine if your actions were willful or not. And if they were, we may use you as an example and send you to prison. I don't know.
Yeah. Kind
I
of
would not want to
comes
be
down to the definition of willful.
in that position. Yeah.
No, not at all.
So yeah, I would do your best to be compliant and not have to worry about that. But the other part of this is all going into a database, and the IRS and other parts of Treasury have said, hey, we're gonna take an analytics approach to our job going forward. Whatever your thoughts of the IRS agents and the FinCEN agents in the past, or you should probably not use those to project into the future, because we're going to use things like the BOSS system and other analytics that we have to go and find lawbreakers, and we're going to take them to task. So, not having your information in when it's supposed to be in could be a red flag for government agencies to bring some enforcement against you. So
Don't want that. It's easier to get compliant. Awesome, Bill. Well, that about covers it. Any kind of final closing thoughts as we wrap up here? This was a lot of fun.
I just say, don't wait till the last minute. Summer is a great time to get your filings done, so you don't have to worry about them, during the fourth quarter and during holidays, when you're trying to get your year-end tax planning done, etc. I would say get it done early.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Bill. This was great. I look forward to continuing to exchange thought leadership ideas with you as we get into the thick of filing season here. And really appreciate your time today, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.